Torn ash had a system for winter. Wood stacked before the first frost, not after. Shutters checked in autumn when the hinges were still dry enough to move. Root cellar filled by the end of harvest, not by guessing. He had learned this the way soldiers learned most useful things, not from instruction but from the specific cold of having done it wrong once and living with the result. He had also learned to read weather the way he had once read roads. The sky above the valley had been doing something for 2 days that he did not like. Pale in the morning, thickening by afternoon, a particular yellow-gray at the edges that in his experience meant the storm was not coming. It was already here and had not announced itself yet. He had spent the morning splitting wood and the afternoon carrying it. His daughter Fen had carried what she could, which was less than she thought and more than he would have asked her to. She was 8, serious in the way of children who had decided that seriousness was a form of usefulness, and she had her mother's habit of working beside a person rather than waiting to be assigned. Merritt had been dead for 2 years. The habit remained in Fen like a language learned young, present in the bone rather than the mind. The cottage sat at the edge of what had once been the Eastern Patrol Road and was now mostly a track remembered by the old trees on either side of it. Torrin had chosen it because it was the kind of place a man could think without the thinking being interrupted, and because the stone walls were 3 feet thick and the well was 20 paces from the door, and the nearest neighbor was far enough away to require intention. He had not chosen it for company. He had not in 2 years regretted this. The first snow began at dusk, small and quiet, the kind that looked harmless. Torrin knew better. He brought in the last armload of wood, latched the outer shutter, and came inside to find Finis sitting at the table with a book she was not reading. She had one of those expressions that meant she was listening to something outside the house, rather than to the words on the page. "It's going to be a bad one," she said. "Bad enough."
I stay up?
"You always stay up for the last question." "I mean after," he looked at her. "After what?" "After the question. In case something happens." Torrin set the wood down by the hearth. He thought about asking what she expected to happen. He decided she probably did not know exactly, and that not knowing was in its own way an answer. "Until the fire settles," he said. "Then bed." Fen nodded and went back to the book she was not reading. The storm arrived properly by the 7th hour. It did not ease into the valley. It descended on it, the way Torrin had seen weather descend on passes in the north, with the sudden conviction of something that had made up its mind. The shutters held. The door held. The fire bent once in a gust that found its way down the chimney and then straightened. He was banking the coals when Fen looked up. She did not say anything. She looked at the door. Torrin had spent 11 years on the border patrol, learning the difference between the sounds a storm made and the sounds a person made in a storm. They were not the same. He was across the room before the thought had finished forming, one hand on the door bar and the other on the skinning knife at his belt. "Stay back," he said. "I am back," Fen said. She was 2 feet behind him. In her terms, this was back. He lifted the bar. The door opened into wind and snow, and a shape that was too large to be anything but an orc, and too still to be anything but in serious difficulty. She had one hand on the door frame, and the other pressed to her left side, and the snow on her shoulders was thick enough that she had been standing there for some time before knocking, or before her hand had slipped and hit the wood. It was hard to tell the difference. Her eyes were open, green gold, the color of river water in autumn, and focused on him with the particular attention of someone who had not yet decided whether he was a threat. He had had that look aimed at him before, usually by people who turned out to be worth worrying about. Blood, dark and slowed by cold, had soaked through the left side of her coat and frozen there in a shape that told him exactly how long she had been walking and in which direction the wound pulled when she moved. "Can you stand?" he said. "Standing," she said. The word came out level despite everything. "Can you come inside without falling on me?" A pause. "Probably. That's honest." He stepped back. "Come in." She came in. She did not fall on him, which he respected. She made it 3 steps past the threshold before her left knee buckled, and he caught her under the arm before she went down all the way, and she weighed considerably more than her size suggested because she was armored under the travel coat, and the armor had not been removed in a long time. Fen closed the door behind them. "Fen," he said. "I know," she said. "Upstairs. Not yet. I need the field kit from the 3rd shelf." The oilcloth bundle. A pause that was not hesitation but recalibration. "All right," she said, and went to get it. The orc woman's name was Gedarav. She was a caravan guard. She had been a caravan guard for 7 years, and for the last 14 hours had been a person who had made a series of increasingly poor decisions in a snowstorm, which she acknowledged without self-pity as she lay on the settle near the hearth and let Torin cut the left side of her coat open. "The caravan," she said, "is not your problem right now. Where we were camped, I know the hollow 3 miles east. Adequate shelter if they stayed put." He examined the wound. Long, from a blade that had gone in at an angle and been pulled rather than withdrawn cleanly. Not a bandit's cut. Too deliberate. "Where is the rest of your guard detail?" Get's jaw tightened. There was a dispute about cargo. With the cargo. Torin looked at her. She looked at the ceiling. "The caravan hired me to protect the goods," she said. "I protected them from the wrong direction. The people carrying them, yes, and the dispute is concluded." She said this the way closed doors sounded. 2 of the merchants left on foot before the storm hit. The 3rd did not leave. Torin processed this. He had been out of the patrol for 4 years and out of formal service for 2 more after that. But the pattern was recognizable. Cargo that moved quietly. People who decided their guard knew too much. A wound that was not random. "Are they going to come looking for you?" he said. "The 2 who left are going to be very cold by morning." Her voice was flat and precise. "The 3rd is not in a position to look for anything, right?" He reached for the spirits. "This will be unpleasant. I know what spirits feel like. I know. I'm warning you anyway." She turned her head and looked at him with an expression that was not gratitude and not suspicion, but something between them. Something that was deciding what to do with information. Fen came back with the field kit, set it on the table without being asked to come closer or stay back, and pulled the chair from the corner to sit on. Not close enough to be in the way. Close enough to see. Torin had tried, after Maret died, to shield Fen from difficult things. He had tried for about 3 months before he understood that what Fen wanted was not to be shielded, but to be trusted with the weight. So he had started trusting her with it. She had not dropped any of it yet. "Her name is Get," he told Fen. "She's a caravan guard. She's injured. She's going to stay until she isn't." Fen nodded once. Then to Get, "I'm Fen." Get looked at her. The green-gold eyes, even pain-narrowed, did something that was not quite an assessment. It was more like recognition of a category. "Fen?" she said. "Yes, that is a short name, so is Get." A silence, then Get said, "Yes, it is." The stitching took longer than Torin would have liked because the wound had a depth that required 2 layers, and the orc anatomy at the ribs was not identical to human anatomy at the ribs, and Get was precise about the differences in a way that suggested she had been on the other side of this procedure before. "Not there," she said. "The muscle runs differently. Follow the line of the rib, not across it. You are about to go across it. I was going to angle. You will pull wrong when it heals." Torin stopped, considered, adjusted the angle. "Better?" She looked down at what he was doing with the critical attention of a person reviewing work that would affect them personally. "Yes, better." Fen had at some point gotten her book from the table and brought it to the chair. She was reading it now, or something that looked like reading. Every few pages she looked up. "Does it hurt a lot?" she asked. "Yes," Get said. "Papa has cold hands," Fen said. "Mama always said." "Cold hands are useful for this," Get said. "Warmth makes swelling." Fen considered this. "So it's good that his hands are cold. In this specific situation. He makes soup that way too. He puts his hands on the outside of the pot to check the temperature." Mama said that was. She stopped, started again. She said most people use a spoon. Torin tied the stitch without speaking. Get was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Most people have not been on the border patrol." Fen looked at her. "How did you know he was on the border patrol?" "The field kit, the way he holds the needle, the way he checked the door before he opened it." She shifted slightly, then went still at a warning look from Torin. "People who have been in patrol service do not fully leave it. He says he left. He did leave. He carries it differently now. But it is still there." Fen looked at Torin. He was looking at the second stitch. "She's right," he said. "It doesn't go away. It just gets quieter." "Like missing Mama," Fen said. The fire shifted. The storm pushed once against the shutters and settled back. "Yes," Torin said. "Like that." Get said nothing. She looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone allowing a room to have a moment without them in it, which was a particular kind of consideration that Torin had not expected. He gave her the alcove off the main room. It had been a storage space before Maret got sick, and they had moved her there to be near the fire. And after, it had been storage again, and now it held a narrow bed that he had not thought about in several months and a blanket that he had. Get examined it without comment. Then she said, This is enough. There's a hook on the wall for your gear. I see it. The door doesn't latch from inside, but I don't need it to. She looked at him. You are a man whose daughter is sleeping in the next room. If I needed the door latched against you, I would not have come inside. Torrin stood in the alcove doorway. That's a lot of trust for someone you've known 3 hours. I have known people for 3 years who deserved less. She sat down on the bed with the careful movement of someone managing a specific pain. Your hands are cold. Your stitches are even. You told your daughter my name before you told her to go upstairs. She looked at her own hands. These are the things I notice. He nodded. Sleep. Fever's going to peak before morning. I know. I'll check the bandage in 4 hours. I know that too. She lay back. Her eyes stayed open for a moment, then closed. The caravan goods. In the cargo, there are transit papers at the bottom of my pack. If someone comes asking, I'll handle it. You don't know what they say. I know what they won't say. He pulled the alcove curtain across. Sleep, get. A pause. You say my name strangely, she said. You say mine strangely too. Another pause, shorter. Yes, she said. I suppose. He checked the bandage at the 4th hour and the 6th, and again when the sky began the pale suggestion of dawn. The fever climbed as he had expected and broke as he had hoped, and he was sitting by the hearth with a cup of tea that had gone cold when he heard Fenn's feet on the stairs. She was in her nightclothes and her hair was loose, and she looked at him with the particular expression of a child who has established that adults sometimes need company and has decided to provide it without being asked. She's still breathing, Torrin said. I know. I checked. You checked through the curtain. I didn't go in. She climbed into the chair across from him, pulling her knees up. She talks in her sleep. What does she say? I don't know. It's not our language. She looked at the alcove curtain. It sounds like counting. Torrin thought about this. He thought about caravan routes, distances between waypoints, names of river crossings, things a guard would memorize and keep in their head against the possibility of having nothing else. Probably counting, he said. What? Roads, distances, things to remember. Fenn was quiet for a moment. Do you count things when you sleep? He looked at his cold tea. I used to. What stopped you? You, he said. You started asking the last question every night. Hard to count things when there's a question in the way. Fenn made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. She pulled the blanket from the chair arm and wrapped it around herself. Papa, Fenn, did we do the last question tonight? He had forgotten. He had not forgotten it in 2 years. It had started when Fenn was 6, Maret's idea, the question spoken aloud before sleep so no worry had to be carried alone into the dark. After Maret, Fenn thought for a moment. If someone comes inside out of the cold, are they still a stranger? He looked at the alcove curtain, which was not moving. I don't know, he said. That's not a good answer. It's the honest one. Fenn considered this with the gravity she gave to things that deserved it. Then she said, I think the cold makes you not a stranger. I think that's how it works. You might be right. Ask her in the morning, she said. She might know. She went back upstairs. He sat by the fire until the last of it became coals, and he thought about the last question, and about the word stranger, and about the sound of counting in a language he did not know. And he did not come to any conclusions, which was fine. Some questions were meant to settle slowly. The storm kept them for 5 days. On the first day, Get slept, and Torrin checked the bandage, and Fenn left a cup of water on the floor beside the alcove curtain without being asked to, and without mentioning it afterward. When the cup was empty the next time she passed, she refilled it. She did not mention this either. On the second day, Get could sit upright and hold a cup and speak in full sentences, and she used all 3 of these capabilities to tell Torrin that his bread was adequate. Adequate, he said. It holds together. It is correctly baked. She turned a piece of it over in her hands. Adequate is not an insult. It is a measurement. My wife used to say it had character. Get looked at the bread. That is a generous word for lumpy. Torrin looked at her. She looked back without apology. It has character, Fenn said from the doorway, where she had been listening. Papa's bread always has character. Character is a generous word, Get said again, but her mouth shifted at the corner in a way that made the words mean something different. Fenn came in and sat at the table. She had her slate with her, which she used for sums and for drawings she did not show Torrin, and for words she was collecting. She had been collecting words since she was 5. Not common words, but words that did something unusual. Words that meant more than one thing, or words that sounded like what they described, or words that came from somewhere and carried the distance with them. Do orcs have a different word for bread, she asked. Get considered this with more seriousness than Torin expected. Several. There is a word for travel bread, which is hard and keeps. A word for bread made at a settlement, which is soft. A word for bread made in a house where a fire has been kept for more than a season. That kind is considered a different thing entirely. Fenn's chalk stopped. Why? Because bread made in a house with an old fire carries the taste of everything that has been cooked before. You cannot make it on a road. It requires a place that has been inhabited long enough to have memory. Fenn looked at Torin's bread, then at the hearth, which had been burning since they moved in, which had been burning since the previous occupant, which sat on a foundation older than Torin by 60 years. Then this is that kind, she said. Get looked at the bread again, at the hearth, at Torin, who was pretending to check the window latch. Yes, she said. I suppose it is. On the third day, Get walked to the window and back without stopping. On the fourth, she walked to the door and opened it and stood in the cold air for 30 seconds before Torin told her that was enough, and she said it was a reasonable assessment and came inside. On the fifth morning, the storm broke. Torin shoveled the path to the well and checked the road, which had no tracks beyond the wind's work. The caravan hollow, 3 miles east, would have drifted badly. Any survivors would have made for the town or stayed put. He would know more when the road was clear enough to travel. He came inside to find Fenn at the table with her slate and Get at the hearth, standing, with one hand braced against the mantelpiece and the other at her side. Not from pain now, from habit. The posture of someone whose body had learned to check the ache before committing to a position. You should sit, Torin said. I have been sitting for 5 days. You've been horizontal for 5 days. There's a difference, less of one than you think. But she sat. She sat in the chair by the hearth that had been Moret's chair, and that Torin had not sat in since, and that Fenn sat in when she was reading, and no one had assigned it to anyone. He noticed. He did not say anything. Fenn looked up from her slate. The last question from last night, she said to Get. I wanted to ask you. Get looked at her. I was asleep last night. I know. Papa answered it, but I don't think he was right. I want to know what you think. Torin set the kettle on. You could ask me whether I was right. I know you weren't. I want to know the right answer. He decided this was the most accurate thing she had said in several days. What was the question? Get said. Whether a wound can be in the wrong place. Fenn's chalk moved on the slate. I asked it because of the fox. There's a fox that keeps coming to the chickens and Papa sets snares and I keep letting it go. He thinks I don't know he knows, but I do know he knows. Torin kept his eyes on the kettle. I let it go because it's hungry, Fenn said, and it can't help where hungry is. Papa said the wound the fox makes in the chicken is in the wrong place. I said the wound the snare makes in the fox is also in the wrong place. Papa said that wasn't the question. Get was quiet for a moment. What was the question? Whether the place determines the wrong, Fenn stopped drawing, or just the hunger. The fire settled. The kettle began its low sound. Get said, in my experience, hungry things go where the food is. The wrong is not in the hunger. The wrong is in the arrangement that makes them overlap. She looked at her hands. I have protected caravans from hungry people. I have never thought the hunger was the wrong thing. The wrong thing was whoever arranged for those people to be that hungry. Fenn's chalk was still. Papa said the fox just needs to hunt somewhere else. Your father is practical. Yes. Practical answers are usually right in the short term. She looked at Torin's back. They are not always right about the thing the question was actually asking. Torin poured water into the kettle and said nothing. Fenn looked from one to the other. He does that, she said, when someone says something true that he doesn't like yet. I know, Get said. I do it too. The road cleared by midday. Torin went to the hollow and found the caravan intact. The 2 merchants long gone. The remaining camp secured by the surviving drivers who had stayed and waited and were now ready to move. He handled the cargo question with the transit papers from Get's pack and a conversation that required his most careful patrol voice, the one that sounded like a statement and was actually a wall. He came back before supper. Get was in the yard, not walking, standing, which was different. She stood by the split wood pile with her hands at her sides and her face turned toward the road, and her pack was on the ground beside her feet. Packed. Torin looked at the pack, then at her. The caravan is ready to move tomorrow, he said. Yes, they need a guard. They need several. They have one. She looked at him. I am upright. I can ride. I cannot run for more than a mile without the stitching pulling, but a caravan does not usually run. Usually. In my experience, when a caravan runs, the guard has already failed. He looked at the pack on the ground. You should stay another week. I should stay until the debt is settled, she said. The debt is not settled in a week. There's no debt. Get looked at him with the expression of someone who had heard a sentence that did not compute. You took me in, you stitched the wound. You fed me under your roof for 5 days and kept me warm, and let your daughter sit with me and ask me questions that were too large for a child to be carrying alone. She carries them well. That is not the point. She looked at the road. You fed me bread made in a house with an old fire and let me sit in the chair by the hearth, and did not ask me what happened on the road beyond what you needed to know. She paused. There is debt. Torin crossed the yard and stood beside the split woodpile. He could see the cottage window from here. He could see Fenn's shape inside, moving between the table and the hearth, doing something with the supper preparation she had taken over sometime on the 3rd day when he was outside checking the road. He said, "The road north is going to be bad for another month. I know. Caravans pay better in spring when the trade routes open properly. I know that too. The fox hasn't been caught yet." He looked at the tree line. Someone's going to keep letting it out of the snare, and the chickens are going to keep paying for it. Get was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was level. That is a great many practical observations. I'm a practical person, you are. She looked at the pack on the ground. None of those are a debt. No, he said. They're not. Then what are they? He picked up the pack out and held it out to her. She took it. She looked at it. He said, the guest room, the alcove. He looked at the cottage. There's a hook inside the door that's too low. I put it there for Margaret. I've been meaning to move it for 2 years. Get looked at the hook visible through the window from where they stood. I can move it, she said. I know. Is that it's not a trade, it's a fact. He met her eyes. You have somewhere to be, yes. And you have somewhere you came from. She was quiet. And sometimes, he said, in between those two things, there's a road that goes past a house with an old fire, and the house has a spare room, and the road will keep. Get held the pack. She looked at it the way she had looked at the bread, the expression of someone revising a measurement upward. The stitching should hold for travel if I don't push the pace, she said. I know. I will be back through the road in the spring. The Eastern Circuit comes back this way. I know that too. He turned toward the cottage. Fenn is making supper. She's going to burn the onions again if no one stops her. She adds them too early. She knows that. She does it anyway because she likes the smell. He stopped at the cottage door. You coming in? Get looked at the road, then at the pack, then at the hook on the inside of the cottage door. She came in. She stayed for 3 weeks. She stayed because the stitching pulled on the 6th day when she tried to lift a fence post, and Torin told her she had done something stupid, and she told him she had been doing something necessary. And he said those were not opposites, and she said she knew and sat down without being asked to. She stayed because Fenn had questions that arrived every night at the bottom of the stairs. And some of them Torin answered, and some of them he referred, and some of them neither of them could answer but could sit with together, which was its own kind of answer. She stayed because the hook on the inside of the door needed moving, and she moved it on the 8th day, from the low position to a height that suited the people actually using it. And she did it with a chisel from the toolbox and 2 new pegs she carved from ashwood she found in the woodpile, and she said nothing about it. And Torin noticed it the same evening and said nothing either. The noticing was enough. She stayed because the fox came back. It came back on the 10th night, and Fenn heard it and woke Torin, and they went out in the dark with a lamp and found it at the coop. And Fenn had taken the snare apart 2 days before without telling anyone, and the fox was standing in the lamplight, looking at them with the patient fury of something that has been hungry for a long time and has not yet given up. Get came out behind them in her coat and her boots, not because she had been asked, but because she had heard them leave and had decided 3 people handled this better than 2. She looked at the fox. The fox looked at her. She said something in Orcish, low and even, not a command, not a plea, the kind of sound that acknowledged a thing without making demands of it. The fox sat down. Fenn made a very small sound. Get crouched, carefully managing the stitching, and took the dried strips of meat from her coat pocket that she had been keeping for the road and set them on the ground between herself and the fox. The fox looked at the meat, looked at Get, took the meat. That's your travel rations, Torin said. I know what it was. You were saving those. I was. She stood. The fox retreated to the tree line with its meat and its dignity and its lesson about strange orc women crouching in snow. The coop needs reinforcing on the east side. That's where it's getting through. Reinforce the east side and the fox will find somewhere easier. Fen, Torin said. I know, Fen said. She was watching the tree line. I know it can't keep coming here. I know you know. She stopped. Get said, you want it to be able to come here and also for the chickens to be safe. And those things cannot both be true at the same time. Yes, that is a very old problem. She looked at the tree line where the fox had disappeared. Most things we want are incompatible with something else we want. The work is finding the arrangement that loses the least. Fen was quiet. Then, what's the arrangement here? Reinforce the coop. Stop pulling the snare. Find a different reason to be kind to the fox. She looked at the girl. There are other ways to be kind to hungry things than letting them into places they will be punished for entering. Fen looked at the coop, then at the tree line, then at Get. Will you help reinforce the east side? Yes. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. They reinforced the east side the next morning, Get and Torin and Fen with her basket of nails. The fox did not come back. Fen left a strip of dried meat at the tree line every third day anyway. Get noticed and did not comment. Torin noticed and did not comment. Some arrangements required looking away from in order to function. She stayed because Fen started asking her the last question alongside Torin, not instead, alongside. She would climb to the second step and pose it to both of them, the question hanging between the three of them like smoke, and each of them would offer a piece of it, and the pieces did not always match, which turned out to be the point. On the 14th night, if you have been in a place long enough to know where the drafts come from, does that make it yours? Torin said. Knowing a place is different from owning it. Get said. In my understanding, a place becomes yours when you begin to repair it without being asked. Fen said. Then it's yours, Papa. You're always fixing things without being asked to pause. Fen looked at Get. You moved the hook without being asked. Get looked at the hook. The ashwood pegs she had carved, the new position that fit her reach and Fen's and not coincidentally Torin's. That was different. She said. Was it? Fen said, and Fen went upstairs. On the 18th day, a rider came from the Eastern Circuit. The caravan had regrouped in town and was ready to move in 3 days. They needed their guard. The rider was polite about it and unhappy about the road, and Torin gave him hot tea and let him rest his horse, and did not ask him any questions about the cargo situation because some questions were better asked by people with a different relationship to the answers. The rider left. Get was in the yard. She had been splitting wood, which she had started doing on the 12th day, because the pile was getting low and she split wood the way she did most things, with complete attention to the work and no conversation about it. She set the axe down when the rider left. Torin came out. They stood in the yard in the cold air. 3 days, she said. Yes, the stitching will hold. I know. The coop is secure. She looked at the east side. The hook is moved. The woodpile is adequate for the rest of the season. She paused. Most things can be left at adequate. Some things should not. The guest room. Will stay a guest room, she said. I travel in spring and autumn. Winter, the Eastern Circuit closes. She looked at the road. Winter is long. He looked at the cottage. At the window where Fen was visible, doing something at the table that required significant concentration and had nothing to do with what she was actually paying attention to. The last question, he said. Get looked at him. She's going to ask worse ones when you're not here to answer the other half. She will ask the same ones, Get said. They will not have worse answers. They will have fewer of them. That's what I said. She almost smiled. Not the small shift he had come to recognize. More than that. The actual thing, brief and real and gone quickly, but there. The road comes back through here, she said. I know, in spring, before the Eastern Circuit opens. I know that too. She looked at the woodpile, at the coop, at the hook on the inside of the door, the new height of it. The ashwood pegs she had cut from the wood that had been in his pile for 2 years, waiting for something to be made from it. There are things I have not answered yet, she said, questions she has not asked. She saves them, he said. The ones she thinks will take more time. She is right to save them. Yes. He picked up the axe and set a new round on the block. She looked at him. He looked at the round. 3 days, he said. You should rest the stitching. 3 days is enough time to split a cord. It is not. It will be if I'm not interrupted. He set the axe down. He stepped back. She picked up the axe and set the next round on the block, and she split it clean, and then the next, and the sound of it filled the yard in the cold air, steady and even and not asking for anything. He went inside. Fen looked up from whatever she had been concentrating on. She's staying until spring, she said. Through the winter, he said. When it opens, she'll go. When it closes again, she'll be back through. Fen thought about this. That's not staying. No, but it's not staying either. No, he said. It's not. Fen looked out the window at Get splitting wood in the yard, steady and unhurried in the cold. What's the word for that? Fen said. I don't know the one for it. Ask her, Fen said. She might. That night, the last question from the second step. Is there a word for a place that isn't home yet but is becoming one? Torin said he did not know. Get was quiet for long enough that Fen leaned forward on the step. Then she said, in my language there is a word, Avrath. It means the road you have taken enough times that your feet remember it before your eyes do. But that's a road, Fen said. Roads and homes are the same word in my language, Get said. The difference is only in the direction. Fen sat with this. So if you come back enough times, she said slowly, does the road become the home? Get looked at the fire, at the hook on the door, at the cup on the shelf, the one with the chip near the handle that held dried herbs now, small and green and useful. She had moved the cup on the fourth day, just slightly, from the back of the shelf to the front where the light reached it. She had not asked. Torin had not said anything. But the herbs were there now, placed by Fen, who had noticed the cup was the right size for keeping small things in. Yes, Get said. I think so. Good night, Fen said. Sleep without crowded dreams. She went upstairs. Her door closed carefully. Torin looked at the fire. Get looked at the hook she had moved. Outside, the winter held the valley in its particular dark, and the road ran both directions from the cottage, east and west, north toward the circuit and south toward town, and all of it waited with the patience of things that were not going anywhere. Inside, the fire burned with the steady knowledge of a hearth that had been kept for longer than one family, and the cup held its herbs in the light, and the hook held its coat at the right height, and the woodpile outside was adequate for the rest of the season, which was not the same as enough, but was, for now, what was needed. Torin stood to bar the door. He slid the iron and stood with his hand on it for a moment. Get, he said. Torin, the eastern circuit, yes. In spring, yes, and then. She was quiet. And then the circuit runs until autumn, and then it closes. She looked at the door, and then it is winter again. He turned. She was looking at the hook, the coat hanging from it. Her coat at the right height, on the ashwood pegs she had carved without being asked. There is a word, she said, in my language, for an action that is not yet a decision but is no longer only a possibility. What is it? She told him. He could not pronounce it. He tried twice, and she told him he was wrong both times, and almost smiled when she said it, and he tried again, and she said closer. What does it mean? He said. Exactly. She looked at the coat. It means the thing you do when you have stopped pretending you might not. The fire was the only sound for a while. Then he said, the east side of the coop. It's going to need another crossbeam before the melt. I know, she said. I already measured for it. He went to bed. She stayed by the fire for a while longer, in the chair that was the chair by the hearth, with the hook on the door at the right height, and the cup in the light, and the last question of the night already answered, in the only way it could be answered, which was not in words, but in the small permanent changes made to a place by someone who had decided, without announcing it, to stop just passing through. In spring she left on a Tuesday. Fen stood in the yard and did not cry, which cost her something, and Get saw it and did not comment on it, which was its own form of care. Last question, Fen said. It is morning, Get said. I'm saving the night one. This is a different one. Get waited. Do roads remember the people who walk them? Get settled the pack on her shoulder. The stitching had held all winter. She had checked it herself 3 times, out of habit. My people say yes. They say a road walked enough times by the same feet becomes a kind of knowing between the road and the feet. Neither one remembers alone. Fen considered this. Then the road back will know you. Yes, and you'll know it. Yes, good, Fen said. Then you won't get lost. Get looked at her for a moment. Then she crouched, the stitching held, and looked at Fen at eye level. I know a great many roads, she said. This one is the one I know which direction is home on. She stood. She looked at Torin, who was standing at the cottage door with his hands in his pockets and the expression of a man who had stopped pretending he might not. The crossbeam, he said, for the coop. The measurements are on the table, she said. 3rd sheet. I'll get it wrong. You will get it adequate. That's not. It will be there when I come back. Then I will correct it. He was quiet for a moment. All right. She turned toward the road. At the edge of the yard she stopped and looked back. The cottage sat where it had always sat. Stone walls and old timber, smoke from the chimney in a straight line, the coop secure on the east side, the pear seeds from last autumn beginning their slow work under the south wall where the stone held warmth. The hook on the door at the right height, the cup in the light. Avrith, she said. He looked at her. The road, she said, and also the home. Depending on the direction, she turned and walked. He watched until the road bent and she was gone. Then Fen took his hand, which she did not usually do anymore, and held it for exactly as long as was needed, and then let go and went inside. He stood in the yard for a while longer. Above the south wall, one of the pair's seedlings had put out a small green hook of leaf, the first one, reaching toward the light with the patient certainty of something that had decided the direction it was going. He went inside. The measurements were on the table, third sheet. And the crossbeam took him 4 days. He got it adequate on the first try, which was not what she had predicted, and then he spent 3 more days making it better than adequate, because she had said she would correct it when she came back, and he had decided that particular conversation would be less satisfying if she had nothing to correct. So he left the angle of the joint slightly off, not so much that it would fail, but enough that someone who knew what they were looking at would know it could be improved. He was fairly sure she would know. Fen watched him work on the 4th day and said, "That joint is wrong. I know. You know how to do it right. I've seen you." Yes. She considered this with the seriousness she gave to things that were actually about something else. "Papa," she said. "Fen, is that for when she comes back?" He set the mallet down. "The angle isn't structural. The coupe is sound. I know it's sound. Is that angle for when she comes back?" He picked the mallet back up. The east side needed the crossbeam. The crossbeam is there. That's the job. Fen looked at the joint, then at her father, then at the joint again. "She's going to know," she said. "Yes," he said. Fen smiled, which she did not do when it was not earned. "Good," she said, and went to see to the chickens. He finished the work and did not fix the joint. The spring was wet and slow. The road ran mud for 3 weeks before it firmed up, and trade moved in fits and starts, as it always did when the thaw came unevenly. Fen went back to her lessons in town 3 days a week and came home with words she had collected and questions she saved for the evening. The last question became, in Get's absence, a different shape, not smaller, just differently weighted. Fen asked it with the air of someone setting something aside for later, answering what could be answered and noting what needed to wait. One evening, "Can a person be homesick for a place they've never lived?" Torin said he thought so. He thought it was a kind of recognizing something before you had the words for it. Fen wrote this on her slate, in the column she kept for answers that were almost right. Another evening, "If someone knows the measurements of your coop, does that mean they know your farm?" Torin looked at the measurements on the table. Third sheet. He had moved them to the shelf after the first week, because the table needed the space. But he had not moved them far. "Knowing the measurements of a thing," he said, "is different from knowing what the thing is for. And what's the coop for?" "Chickens," he said. "And also a conversation I'm saving." Fen had looked at him with the expression she had gotten from Maret, the one that saw through the practical answer to the actual one. "She's coming back," Fen said. It was not a question. "The Eastern Circuit closes in autumn," he said. "She'll come back through before the snow. And then—" He had looked at the hook on the door, the right height, the ashwood pegs carved without asking. "And then it will be winter," he said. "And the road will wait." Fen seemed to find this satisfactory. She went upstairs without pushing further, which was unusual enough that he thought about it later, lying awake with the particular alertness of a man who had stopped being surprised by hope and started being surprised by how quietly it had come back. She came in late September, 3 days before the first frost. He heard the horse on the road before he heard anything else, which was the patrol habit that did not go away. And he was standing in the yard when she came around the bend. Same pack, same coat, a new scar at the jawline that had healed clean and did not require comment. She looked at the yard, at the coop, at the chimney which was drawing correctly, at the hook on the door. She dismounted. "The crossbeam," she said. "East side," he said. She handed him the horse's reins and went to look at it. He waited. He heard her move around the coop, heard her crouch, the sound of it. She had learned to make less noise with that, and heard her examining the joint. She came back. "The angle is wrong," she said. "I know." She looked at him, the green-gold eyes, the river water color of them, settling on his face with the attention she gave to everything, the expression that had learned over one winter to do something different than assess. "You left it wrong on purpose," she said. "The coop is sound," he said. "The joint is correctable." "Yes." She looked at the door, at the hook. "I see." He handed her back the horse. "Fen's inside. She has questions." "How many?" She said she was saving the ones that needed more time. Get looked at the cottage window where Fen was visible, trying to appear as if she was not watching. How many is that? She has a list. Get made a sound that was almost a laugh, not the shift of the mouth he had learned over the winter. More than that. I see, she said again. She's been good about saving them, he said. She said some answers needed you specifically. Did she say which ones? No. She said you'd know when you heard them. Get looked at the road behind her, the direction she had come from. Then at the cottage in front of her. At the door and the hook, and the chimney drawing clean, and the coop with its correctable joint, and the south wall where the pair seedlings survived the summer, and were small and determined and unreasonably alive for something that had no business growing on that rise. She handed him the reins again. The horse needs water, she said. I know, and the joint needs correcting before the freeze makes the wood too stiff to work. I know that too. And Fen's list we'll keep until after supper, he said. She knows. He took the horse to the barn. She went inside. When he came in, she was at the table across from Fen, who had her slate out and her list ready, and was explaining the organizational system she had developed for the questions, which involved 3 columns. Questions Torin could answer, questions Get could answer, and questions that needed both of them and possibly the fox. Get was listening with the gravity she gave to things that deserved it. Torin hung his coat on the hook at the right height. He put the kettle on. The fire was burning with the knowledge of a hearth that had been kept for another season, and the cup was in the light on the shelf with its dried herbs, and the pack was on the floor by the door, not yet in the corner, but facing it. That night, last question from the second step. Is Avrath a word for one direction or both? Get was quiet for a moment. Both, she said, going and returning. The road knows you in both directions if you have walked it enough. And have you? Fen asked. Walked it enough? Get looked at the hook on the door, at the pack on the floor, facing the corner, at Torin, who was looking at the fire the way he looked at things he had decided. Yes, she said. I think I have. Fen said good night and went upstairs, and her door closed with unusual care. The fire burned. Outside, the frost that had been coming for 3 days finally arrived, quiet and certain, laying itself over the yard and the coop and the south wall where the pair seedlings stood in their patient rows. And the road bent away in both directions under the first cold stars. Inside, the pack moved to the corner, not dramatically, not announced. Get set it there between one breath and the next, the way she had moved the hook and the cup, without asking, without explaining, because some things were better said in the doing than in the saying. Torin looked at the corner. He said nothing. She said nothing. The fire said what the fire always said, which was that warmth was not a debt and not a gift, but simply what happened when something was kept burning long enough. He barred the door. The road waited outside, going both directions, patient and known, Avrath in both its meanings, and the house breathed around them with the particular ease of a place that had been waiting for its own correct arrangement and had finally, quietly, found it.